I had been standing in that boardroom for over 20 minutes, trying not to let my knees give out beneath me. The floor-to-ceiling windows of the 32nd floor offered a stunning view of downtown Chicago, but I wasn't looking out. My eyes were fixed on the document in front of me, the merger agreement, the one that would mark the end of Hudson & Company, the company my father built from scratch, and in some twisted way, the end of everything that once felt like family. The air was heavy with cologne and tension. Men in custom suits murmured softly to one another, checking their watches, their phones, adjusting their cufflinks. The CEO from Marlowe Industries, Richard Marlowe himself, sat at the head of the table with a rehearsed smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He tapped his Mont Blanc pen against the glass surface, waiting. I was supposed to be honored. I was the son taking his father's legacy into a new era. But all I felt was the weight of 1,000 things left unsaid. That's when the door creaked open. At first, no one noticed her. She moved quietly, as though she wasn't sure she was allowed in. Dressed in the navy blue uniform of the building's janitorial staff, she pushed a mop bucket into the room with both hands. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her eyes scanned the space carefully, nervously, almost like she was searching for something. Richard frowned immediately. "Excuse me, miss. This is a closed meeting." She didn't respond. Instead, she reached into the front pocket of her apron and pulled out something small and crumpled. A photograph. She walked around the edge of the table, ignoring the tension that now filled the room, and came to a stop right in front of me. I looked down at the photo in her trembling hand. A young boy, maybe 5 years old, sitting in the lap of a woman with soft eyes and a shy smile. They were in a park, an old rusted swing in the background. I remembered that park, I remembered the photo, I remembered her, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. "Daniel," she said, her voice cracking, "I didn't come to clean today. I came to stop you." Silence. All eyes turned to me. I couldn't look away from her face. Older now, tired, but still unmistakably hers. My mother. The mother who had disappeared when I was 7. The woman I hadn't seen in 30 years. The woman I had convinced myself was dead. And now she stood here in front of a boardroom full of executives, as if no time had passed. I heard Richard's voice, cold and sharp. "Daniel, what is this?" But I didn't answer, because the truth was, I had no idea. Her hand trembled as she held out the photo, and I realized I was trembling too. I didn't take it. I couldn't. My fingers refused to move. My mouth was dry. My heart wasn't racing. It was frozen. She looked up at me with eyes full of apology, but no words of it, just silence, that unbearable, loaded silence. "What is she doing here?" Richard asked again, more sternly now. "Security will escort her out," someone else said, already reaching for their phone. But I raised my hand, stopping them. "No," I heard myself say, my voice low and rough. "Let her speak." Everyone went quiet again. She opened her mouth, hesitated, then took a shaky breath. "I know this isn't the place, or the time, but I've been cleaning this building for 2 years now. I've seen you come and go, Daniel, and every day I've asked myself if today would be the day I'd say something." I felt the room tilt. "Cleaning the building? You've been here this whole time?" I asked. She nodded, a faint, almost embarrassed smile forming at the corners of her mouth. The irony, right? After everything, after leaving, her voice caught in her throat. No one in that room dared speak. I could feel their discomfort. Executives in $1,000 suits watching a family drama unfold in real time, unsure if they were witnessing a breakdown or a miracle. I wanted to scream, to ask her why she left, why she never came back, why she stood there like we were long-lost acquaintances instead of mother and son, but I didn't. I didn't trust my voice to hold all that weight. Instead, I whispered, "You let me think you were dead." She flinched and I saw it, that wound still bleeding beneath her ribs. "I didn't mean to disappear, but I did. I ran, Daniel. I was scared. Your father—" I cut her off. "Don't talk about him." My voice was sharp, sudden, and I regretted it immediately. But it was too late. Her face fell and the shame in her eyes was almost too much to bear. The CEO leaned toward me and said quietly, "Daniel, we really should proceed." And in that moment, the world divided into two paths. One where I signed the deal and walked away from a woman who had already walked away from me, or two where I listened, just listened. She looked at me then, like a mother does when she's trying to memorize the face of the child she lost long ago. "I know you don't owe me anything, but if you sign those papers, Hudson & Co. is gone forever, and so is your father's name. And I thought maybe you'd want to know the truth, before everything else is gone too." Her voice didn't shake that time. The pen was still on the table, the contract still waiting. But suddenly I didn't care about any of it, because the past had just walked into the room and it had my mother's face. I don't remember sitting down. One moment I was standing, and the next I was in the leather chair at the end of the table, leaning forward, elbows on my knees, hands clasped like I was trying to hold my body together. She stood in front of me, still holding the photograph, her eyes flicking nervously between me and the executives, who clearly wished they were anywhere else. "You said you had something to tell me," I said quietly. "So say it." She looked down at the floor for a long moment, then back up. "Your father wasn't the man you remember." That was the wrong thing to say. I sat up straighter, the old anger returning like a switch had been flipped. "He raised me." "You didn't." She nodded slowly. "I know, and I won't defend what I did. But Daniel, you deserve to know why I left. You deserve the truth about what happened." My jaw tightened. Part of me didn't want to know. I had lived 30 years with one story. She left us, disappeared. No notes, no visits. My father told me she was sick, that she had lost herself. And eventually, he stopped talking about her altogether. He never cried. But I did. For years. Now she stood here, like the last ghost in a haunted house. "He was a good father to you, wasn't he?" she asked. It wasn't a real question. She already knew. "He tried," I said. She nodded again, more to herself than to me. But to me, he was someone else, controlling, angry, sometimes cruel. I felt a slow burn rise in my chest. "He never laid a hand on me," I said. Her voice softened. "No, because he loved you. You were the only part of him that was still good. But the way he treated me, Daniel, I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. And when I left, I wanted to take you with me. But he threatened me, said he'd ruin me, that I'd never see you again." She paused, searching my face for any sign I believed her. I gave her none. "So you just gave up?" I asked. "I broke," she said. "It's not the same." I looked away. The storm outside had finally arrived, lightning flashing against the windows, thunder rumbling deep in the city's bones. Richard cleared his throat. "Daniel, maybe we should take a short break, give you some time." I didn't answer him. I kept my eyes on the photo she was still holding, my childhood. A smile I hadn't seen in decades, a woman I'd grieved, resented, and now couldn't even look at without wanting answers she might not be able to give. "Why now?" I asked. "Why today, after all these years?" Her fingers tightened around the edges of the photo. "Because I saw what you were about to do. Erase your father's name. Erase everything. And I thought, maybe that's the only way you'll hear me. If there's still something left to save." I stood slowly, pushing the chair back. "There's nothing left to save," I said. "Not with him. Not with you." I turned and walked toward the door, and then she said something I didn't expect. "Your father died with secrets, Daniel. I was one of them. But there's another." I stopped. "What do you mean?" She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "He told you I was gone, but he never told you what he did the night I left." That was the moment the room disappeared. The deal, the board, the storm. All I could hear was her voice. All I could feel was the unraveling. Her words rang in my ears like a warning bell in a place long abandoned. "He never told you what he did the night I left." I turned back to her, heart thudding, arms stiff at my sides. "What are you talking about?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes scanned the room, everyone watching, frozen in an uncomfortable kind of silence. Men and women used to power plays and market strategies now reduced to spectators in a mother and son's reckoning. "It's not something I can explain in front of—" She gestured vaguely at the conference table. "All of this." I shook my head. "You walked into this room. You chose this stage. So don't start editing now." There was a moment, just one, when I thought she might walk away again. But then she nodded, slow and heavy, as if lowering a weight she'd carried for half her life. "That night, I packed a bag, just one. I told your father I was leaving and that I was taking you with me. He stood in the hallway blocking the door with his arms crossed, said I was never going to see you again, said I was nothing." Her voice wavered. "And then he grabbed the phone, told me he'd call the police, tell them I was unfit, unstable, that I'd abandoned you. He said I'd never be believed." I swallowed hard. I wanted to say I didn't believe her, but something about the way her shoulders curled, how her eyes didn't plead, only remembered, made me pause. "I begged him," she said, her voice cracking, "not to do that to you, to at least let me say goodbye." She looked at me then, and for the first time I saw not the woman who had disappeared from my life, but the one who had been erased from it. "He told me if I so much as touched you before leaving, he'd make sure you thought I was dead." That hit me harder than I expected, because that's exactly what I had believed. I remembered the way my father spoke about her, or refused to. I remembered the photo albums that were suddenly missing, the toys she had given me that were quietly thrown out, the way the air changed in the house after she was gone. It was as if she had never existed, and I let him do it. "I used to wait for you at the window," I said, my voice low, "every night for months." Her face crumpled, not dramatically, just slowly. "I know," she whispered. "I was parked across the street some nights. I couldn't come close, but I couldn't leave either. I watched you draw on the fogged-up glass. Sometimes I'd imagine what you were writing. I hadn't remembered that, not until she said it. But suddenly, a memory rushed in, me tracing something into the fog on my bedroom window, a heart, a name. Mom." I staggered back a step, as if the past had reached out and pushed me. Behind me, Richard shifted again. "Daniel, really, we need to proceed or—" "We're done," I said sharply. "Clear the room." There was silence. "Excuse me." I said, "Clear the room." They hesitated until they saw my face. And then, one by one, suits shuffled out, murmuring among themselves, glancing back as if hoping this would become a story they could dine out on later. But I didn't care. When the room was finally empty, just me and her, I sat down again. She remained standing, the photo still in her hand like a flag she didn't know how to raise. "So what now?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. "Now I tell you what your father didn't, and you decide whether or not it matters." Outside, the rain had begun to fall. Inside, the walls were finally starting to crack. The rain softened against the windows, a steady rhythm that seemed to sync with the way my thoughts spiraled. I stared at her. This woman who once braided my hair with clumsy fingers, who kissed my scraped knees, and who vanished like a dream the night everything changed. She sat across from me now, shoulders tense, hands gripping the edges of her uniform like armor. "He told you I was unstable?" she asked quietly. "He told me you left because you couldn't handle motherhood, that you were sick, selfish." Her mouth tightened, not in anger, in pain. "He made sure there were no photos left of me, didn't he?" I nodded slowly. That part hurt more than I expected. "He burned them, every single one." She closed her eyes. I wondered how many nights she'd imagined this moment, sitting face to face, no longer shadows, no longer silence. "I need you to understand something, Daniel. I left because I had to. But I stayed gone, because he made it impossible to return." "You could have fought," I said, bitterness slipping into my voice. "You could have tried." "I did," she whispered. And then she reached into her cleaning apron again and pulled out a folded envelope, yellowed with age. She placed it gently on the table. "That's a court summons dated 6 months after I left. He filed for full custody, accused me of neglect, abandonment, Emotional instability. I had no lawyer, no money, no family left. He had everything: connections, reputation, control. I picked it up with shaking hands. The ink had faded, but the accusations were still legible. Words like unfit, psychological distress, history of erratic behavior jumped out at me like knives. "He built a case," she said, her voice hollow. "A convincing one, and the worst part, he convinced you too." I felt like I was drowning in a story I didn't want to be part of. "Why didn't you fight harder?" I asked. "Why didn't you come to my school, write me letters, anything?" She leaned forward then, her voice steadier. "Because every time I tried, Daniel, he shut the door. I sent letters. They came back. I called the house. He changed the number. I came to your school once and was told I wasn't authorized to see you. The receptionist looked at me like I was some stranger off the street." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them. "I still remember your backpack," she said. "Red with a white zipper. You were walking across the playground and I stood behind the fence like a ghost, watching my son laugh with friends, not knowing I was just 30 feet away. I covered my face with both hands, trying to breathe. The image of that, her behind a fence, me unaware, was too much." "He didn't just take you from me," she said softly. "He took me from you." For the first time, the silence between us wasn't made of resentment. It was made of grief, mutual, jagged, and ancient. "Why didn't you ever start over?" I asked. "Have another family, another life?" She smiled faintly. It was the saddest smile I'd ever seen. "Because I already had a son." That simple sentence broke something in me. I sat there staring at her, unable to move, as everything I thought I knew collapsed under the weight of a single truth. My father didn't just lose a marriage, he stole a childhood. And now, the woman in front of me wasn't just a cleaning lady. She was a survivor of the same man I had idolized. "He died last year," I said suddenly. She nodded. "I know. I was at the funeral, in the back. I didn't come close." "Why not?" She looked at me for a long moment, her voice barely audible. "Because you were crying for him, and I didn't want you to look at me and stop." I covered my mouth, staring at the table. That image, me crying for the man who raised me, and her, just behind me, silent. She never interrupted my grief, even though he had interrupted her entire life. That was the moment I realized forgiveness wasn't just about apology. It was about knowing the truth had been waiting all along, just outside the room. And it had the voice of a woman who never stopped watching from behind the fence. I didn't go to the office the next morning. I went to the janitor's break room in the basement of the building instead. It took me 3 wrong turns, a suspicious stare from a security guard, and a deeply awkward conversation with a maintenance supervisor named Terry to get there. But eventually, he pointed me down a hallway behind the loading dock and said, "You're looking for Evelyn, right?" Evelyn. Her name. The room was quiet, too quiet for a place where billion-dollar decisions were supposed to happen. The faint smell of floor cleaner clung to the air, bleach, lemon, and something older, something like time itself. I stared at her hands. They were rougher than I remembered, fingers calloused, nails cut short. She had worked, hard, probably every day since she left, and now I was beginning to wonder if all those years I'd been angry at the wrong person. "I don't know what to do with all this," I said, more to myself than to her. She nodded slowly. "You don't have to decide today, or even this year. I just needed you to know." That was the part that undid me. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wasn't demanding understanding or trying to rewrite the past in her favor. She just wanted me to see the full picture before I buried it again. And still, it felt like too much. "I believed everything he said about you," I whispered. "And I defended him, to friends, to girlfriends, even in therapy. I built my entire adult life around the lie that you didn't want me." She swallowed hard, her eyes shining. "I know, and that's what hurts the most. That you grew up thinking my silence meant I didn't care." She leaned back slightly, her voice quieter now. "But silence isn't always absence, Daniel. Sometimes it's survival." Her words settled deep, somewhere behind my ribs. Outside, the storm was easing. Raindrops traced paths down the windows, and beyond them the city kept moving. Cars, people, lights switching from green to red, life indifferent to pain. "Did he ever regret it?" I asked. "What he did to you?" She hesitated. "Maybe in his own way, but your father wasn't built for regret. He believed control was love, and I think to him, protecting you meant keeping me away." I laughed bitterly. "That's not protection, that's possession." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time I saw something flicker behind her sadness, pride, maybe even love. "You grew up," she said, "into someone who can see the difference." I wanted to say I didn't know who I had grown into, that most days I still felt like a scared kid hiding in the corners of a big house, but I didn't say that. Instead, I stood. She tensed, as if bracing for rejection, but I wasn't leaving. I walked over to her slowly, like approaching something fragile. I looked down at the photo still in her hand and finally took it. "You kept this all these years?" It's the only picture I had left of us. Everything else was taken. I turned it over. On the back, in faded ink, was my name in her handwriting. Daniel, 1995. First day at the park. And just like that, the memory came rushing back. Her holding my hand as I climbed the wooden steps to the slide, her cheering quietly when I swung all by myself for the first time. That had happened. That was real, not a fantasy, not a story buried by someone else's shame. I sat back down, clutching the photo. "You don't want me to sign the deal," I said after a while. She shook her head. "I don't care about the deal. I care about you, knowing why your father fought so hard to keep it all. This company, this name, it's the only version of his story left, and now you get to decide whether it continues or changes." I let her words hang in the air, like the final note of a song you can't forget. I had always believed legacy was something we inherited, but maybe it was something we chose. I didn't sleep that night. After she left the conference room, quietly, without a hug, without asking for one, I sat alone for hours, staring at the signed but not yet submitted contract. My team had no idea what was going on. Richard had sent me 3 emails already, reminding me of the urgency of finalization. I ignored them all. Instead, I went home, pulled a half-empty bottle of scotch from the cabinet, and stared at the rain from my kitchen window. The city lights shimmered in the puddles below, and somewhere in the hum of night, I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. The night I heard the glass break. I was 7, lying in bed with the covers pulled up to my chin. I'd heard raised voices, muffled by the thick walls, my father's bark, my mother's sobs. Then, the sharp crash of something shattering, followed by silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel safe. I'd gotten out of bed, tiptoed to the hallway, and peeked through the crack in the door. I saw my mother standing in the living room, her shoulders trembling. My father stood between her and the front door, arms crossed, his face unreadable. "You'll never see him again," he had said. I remembered that sentence exactly. I didn't know what it meant at the time. I just knew that the next morning, she was gone. No note, no suitcase. Just gone. And when I asked where she was, my father had said, "She left," because she didn't want to be a mother anymore, and I believed him. Now I knew better. I stood up from the kitchen stool and walked to the small closet where I kept an old storage box marked Dad. Inside were dusty papers, old keychains, and a few photos I'd salvaged from his desk after he died. At the very bottom was a black leather notebook. His handwriting, small, tight, angled, filled the pages. Meeting notes, business ideas, projected sales. And then on the final few pages something else, a single line. She said she'd take him. I couldn't let her. My chest tightened. I flipped the page. I told her if she left, I'd make sure he never knew the truth. That I'd protect him from the mess she'd become. Another page. Maybe I went too far, but he needed stability. Not her drama, not her weakness. I stopped reading. Her weakness. That was how he saw her, and how I had learned to see her. Fragile, unreliable, absent. But she hadn't been weak. She had been afraid, alone, cornered, and now, all these years later, still brave enough to show up. I sat on the floor, notebook in my lap, and let the grief hit me. Grief for the boy I had been. For the mother I had missed. For the man my father turned out to be. It was so much easier when I believed one of them was the villain. But life doesn't work like that. People hurt people. Sometimes the ones they love most. Sometimes without even knowing how deep the damage runs. In the morning I would return to the office. The deal would still be waiting. But I wasn't the same man who had stood at that table yesterday. Because now I knew the truth. My mother's name. I hadn't said it aloud in years, maybe decades. The break room was small, cramped, lit with the kind of buzzing fluorescent lights that made everything look tired. There were 3 metal lockers, 2 stained armchairs, and a folding table covered in mismatched mugs. A tiny microwave sat crooked on a shelf, humming faintly. A bulletin board displayed half-ripped flyers and old cleaning schedules. And there she was, wearing the same navy blue uniform. Sitting in the corner, sipping from a chipped mug that said Number 1 Grandma. She looked up, startled, and stood quickly. Daniel. I didn't know what I'd expected. Maybe some movie-like moment where we fell into each other's arms, years melting away in a single embrace. But that's not what happened. We just stood there, 2 people with too much history and no script. I lifted the paper cup in my hand. I brought coffee. She nodded, tears already brimming. You remembered how I take it? 2 creams, no sugar. She smiled just barely. I handed it to her and pulled out the folding chair opposite hers. The room was too small for both of us, but somehow just right. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that doesn't need filling. Eventually she spoke. I didn't think you'd come back. Neither did I. She looked at me, really looked, and I felt my throat tighten. I read something last night, I said, in one of Dad's notebooks. He admitted what he did, what he told you, what he kept from me. She closed her eyes for a moment. Thank you for telling me. I'm sorry it took me 30 years to listen. We sat there, the soft hum of the microwave filling the space between us. Then I asked the question I'd been avoiding since the moment she stepped into that boardroom. Why didn't you ever write me yourself, not through school or court, but just to me? She looked down at her cup. Because I was afraid you'd never read it, and that if you did, you'd throw it away, and that would have been worse than not sending it at all. I nodded. I understood that fear now. I'd lived it too. Do you have a family? I asked. She shook her head. No. After I left, I didn't know how to start over. I stayed in Chicago, found jobs, places to sleep, but I never remarried. I didn't want another child, not after losing you. I took a deep breath. I don't have one either. I think I convinced myself I was too busy, but maybe I just didn't trust the idea of family anymore. Her eyes met mine. You still can, Daniel. You still can. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even advice. It was hope. The first I'd heard in a long, long time. And for the first time, I let it in. That day, I didn't go back to work. I stayed in that basement break room with her, long after the coffee had gone cold. We talked about small things, just to keep the air moving. She asked about my apartment, my favorite food, whether I still watched baseball. I asked about the neighborhood she'd lived in, the jobs she took, how she ended up cleaning the very building where I worked. And then she reached into her locker and took out a small battered envelope. It was thin, yellowed. My name was written on it in blue ink. The handwriting tilted a little to the right. I wrote this for your 10th birthday, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I never mailed it. I've kept it with me ever since. She handed it to me with trembling fingers. I stared at the envelope in my hands, suddenly terrified to open it. It felt sacred, heavy, like opening it would change everything. But I did. Inside was a folded card, a cartoon dinosaur wearing a birthday hat. Inside, in the same careful handwriting, Happy 10th birthday, Daniel. I know you probably don't remember my voice anymore, and I wouldn't blame you. But not a single day goes by that I don't think of you. I wonder how tall you are now. If you still love drawing trucks, if you still talk in your sleep like you used to when you were small. I'm sorry I can't be there to see you grow. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder. But I love you, sweetheart, I always have, no matter what anyone tells you. I didn't realize I was crying until the ink blurred in front of me. I looked up and she wasn't crying. She was just watching me, quiet, still. Like she had waited her entire life for this moment and didn't want to disturb it. I folded the card carefully and held it in both hands, like it might vanish if I wasn't careful. I used to wonder every year if you remembered my birthday, I said. Eventually I stopped hoping. She nodded, but I never stopped remembering. The words clung to the air between us like fog. I suddenly wished I could go back in time, to that lonely 10-year-old version of me, crying under the covers, convinced he'd done something to make her leave. I wanted to hand him this card, let him read it, let him know he wasn't forgotten. But I couldn't. All I had was now. Thank you, I said, and I meant it more deeply than I'd ever meant anything in my life. She smiled. It was small, but real. There was a pause, and then she asked gently, "Do you remember the bracelet?" The question hit me like a sudden gust of wind through a door I thought had long been locked. What bracelet? You were 5. It had tiny beads with your name on it. I made it for you with my last paycheck before I left. You wore it everywhere. I blinked, and then I saw it in my mind. Faded blue cord, white beads spelling out DANIEL. I hadn't thought of it in years, but I remembered how it used to slip up and down my wrist, how I'd tug at it when I was nervous. Dad threw it out, I said it was childish. Her face fell. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photo she'd given me in the boardroom, the one of us in the park. This is the only proof I have that you were real, I said, that we were real. She reached across the table and placed her hand on mine, warm, gentle, tired. You don't need proof, she said softly. You carry it in your memory, in your heart, and maybe in the things that still hurt. And she was right, because grief doesn't lie, and neither does love, even after all this time. The next morning, I walked into the office before sunrise. The hallways were still dark, the cleaning crews gone, the usual noise of keyboards and footsteps not yet filling the space. My footsteps echoed in the silence as I moved toward the conference room, the one where everything had started unraveling. On the glass door in clean gold lettering, it still read, Hudson & Co. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the name. My father's name. The name that had opened doors for me but closed them for her. The name that had once meant pride, then duty, and eventually conflict. And now it meant something else entirely. Legacy. But whose? I went inside, turned on the light, and set the unsigned contract on the table. The pen lay beside it, untouched since the day she walked in. I sat down and opened the folder, read every word again, this time slower, not like an executive, but like a son. The merger was still a smart business move. It would triple our market access/costs, secure my own financial future for the next 10 years. But it would also erase the name, the logo, the story. And the older I got, the more I understood. Stories are currency too. They're what survive us. When my team arrived 2 hours later, I told them to cancel the finalization meeting. Richard called me personally. Daniel, this isn't just hesitation, it's suicide. You're walking away from generational wealth. I didn't flinch. Then maybe it's time to stop inheriting damage and start choosing differently. He was silent for a moment, then said, You're making a mistake. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't so sure. Later that day, I met her again, Evelyn. This time at a small coffee shop just off Halstead. No janitor's break room, no boardroom tension, just 2 people trying. She wore a pale green cardigan. I noticed her nails were neatly trimmed now, painted the softest shade of pink. You didn't sign it, did you? She asked as I sat down. I shook my head. No. I couldn't. Because of me? I paused, then said honestly, because of the truth. She didn't smile, but I saw something ease in her posture. Like a door inside her finally unlocked, I reached into my bag and handed her a small box. She looked at me, surprised. What is it? Open it. Inside was a bracelet, blue cord, white beads, just like the one from the photo. Only this time it spelled Mom. She covered her mouth with her hand, eyes filling instantly. Daniel. I don't know if this fixes anything, I said, my throat tightening, but I wanted you to have it, as a start. She didn't speak, just reached across the table and took my hand. I let her, because for the first time in over 30 years, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even confused. I was grieving, yes, but I was also beginning. And beginnings don't always come with fireworks or grand speeches. Sometimes they come with silence and the warmth of a hand you thought you'd never hold again. A week later, I drove back to the place I had sworn I'd never return to, the house on Ravenswood Avenue. It still stood exactly as I remembered, stiff, angular, too quiet. The paint was peeling in places. The grass had grown high around the fence. A for sale sign leaned slightly to one side in the front yard, empty now, just like it had been since the funeral. I had avoided it since the day we buried my father, but something inside me needed to go back, not to remember, but to release. I parked at the curb and sat for a moment, gripping the wheel. The air was thick with old ghosts. When I stepped inside, the scent of the past hit me all at once. Faint cologne, old wood, the musty presence of things that once mattered. My footsteps echoed against the hardwood floors as I moved through the living room, the kitchen, and finally, up the stairs to my old bedroom. It was exactly as I'd left it. The same bookshelf, the same baseball pennants, even the scuff mark on the doorframe where I'd once slammed it shut after a fight about staying out too late. But now, it all felt small. I sat on the edge of my bed and pulled out the photo again, the one from the park where she held me on her lap. I realized something I hadn't seen before. In the background, behind the playground, was a bench. On it sat a man, blurry, out of focus. I never noticed him growing up. But now I recognized the posture, the stiff shoulders, the hand curled into a fist. My father had been there that day, watching. Even then, he had been controlling what I remembered. I walked back downstairs and into his study. The desk was still cluttered. Receipts, a half-burned candle, a leather-bound book of quotes, and in the drawer, a box of old cassette tapes, labeled by year. I found one marked 1995, the year she left. I dusted off the tape player in the corner, pushed the cassette in and pressed play. There was static, then his voice. Daniel's been asking again? Keeps saying he heard her in the hallway. Keeps looking out the window. A pause. Then quietly, I can't let him remember her. I won't lose him too. The recording ended. No justification, no guilt, just a man trying to erase a woman from her own son's memory. And it nearly worked. Until now. I left the house with the photo in my back pocket and the tape in my hand. I didn't feel angry anymore, just tired of holding on to someone else's version of the story. Later that evening, I met her again. She was waiting for me on a bench near the lake, wearing a denim jacket that looked a size too big. I sat beside her without saying anything at first. She looked over, sensing something had changed. You went back, she said. I nodded. I found a tape. He talked about me like I was a memory he had to erase. She didn't flinch. She didn't ask to hear it. She just placed her hand gently on mine. Thank you for going. I looked at her, and for the first time I saw not just my mother, but a woman who had lived through her own storm. Do you want to see the house? I asked. Her eyes widened. You'd take me there? It's yours too, no matter what he said. We sat in silence, the sky darkening around us. The lake shimmered under the evening light. A breeze picked up, tugging at her hair. What if I don't remember where things were? She asked softly. I smiled. Then we'll make new memories. And just like that, The door between us didn't feel locked anymore. It felt open. She hesitated on the front porch, one hand on the doorknob, the other pressed lightly against the frame, as if touching the house itself could undo her. I stood beside her, key in hand, watching her eyes flick across the weathered shutters, the cracked step, the familiar shape of the home she hadn't seen in 3 decades. "It looks smaller," she whispered. "It always does," I said. I unlocked the door and we stepped inside together. It was late afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtains, laying pale patterns on the floor. Dust hung in the air like memory itself, and for a long moment, we just stood there in silence. Then she walked forward. Not fast, not like someone returning to a place they loved, more like someone walking through a field of landmines. Her eyes moved across the living room, the fireplace, the corner where the old piano used to be, the hallway, and finally the stairs. Her hand slid along the banister as she climbed. I followed. When she reached the top, she paused, then turned right, toward the room that had once been theirs, hers and his. She stood in the doorway, staring inside. I couldn't read her face. I wasn't sure if I should speak. "He used to lock the door when he was angry," she said softly. "He locked me in once," I replied. She turned to me, eyes searching. "He did." I nodded. "For an hour. Said I needed to learn about silence." Her face crumpled. "Oh God." "It's okay," I said quickly. "It's not, well, maybe it's not okay. But I'm okay now." She nodded, then moved past that door and toward mine. She paused again, then stepped inside. Everything was still where it had been: the bookshelf, the race car posters, the lamp with the baseball glove base. She walked over to the closet, opened it slowly, and then, without warning, reached up to the top shelf and pulled something down. A box, cardboard, labeled in her handwriting. Daniel, Art Projects, Pre-K to First. My heart stopped. I stepped forward, took the box from her hands, and opened it on the bed. Inside were drawings, a clay handprint, a paper Mother's Day card written in shaky pencil. "I love you, Momi." "He didn't throw everything away," I said in disbelief. She sank down on the edge of the bed. Her hands trembled as she picked up one of the drawings, a house with a stick figure woman standing in the window. "You drew me," she whispered. We sat like that for a long time, not crying, not talking, just remembering. At one point she said, "Do you think he ever looked at these?" I nodded. "I think he kept them for the same reason I did, because letting go of you would have made him admit what he did." She didn't answer, but I saw something loosen in her posture. A breath, maybe, that she hadn't taken in years. We left the room together, down the stairs, back through the living room and out the front door. And just as we reached the steps, she stopped, turned back, and said, "Can I walk through the hallway one more time? Just to hear my footsteps again." I nodded. She stepped inside alone. I stayed by the door, listening as her footsteps moved slowly down the wooden hallway floor. Measured, reverent. And for the first time since I was a child, I realized how much I'd missed that sound. A mother's presence. Not loud, but lasting. A few days later, I did something I hadn't done since college. I cooked dinner, nothing fancy. Just roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. Simple, familiar. The kind of meal that smells like comfort. She arrived 10 minutes early, holding a pie in one hand and wearing the same green cardigan from the coffee shop. Her hair was pinned back, and I could tell she'd tried, maybe a little too hard, to look put together. But it wasn't for vanity. It was hope. I let her in and took her coat. She handed me the pie. "It's apple," she said quickly. "Store-bought. I'm not much of a baker." "That makes 2 of us," I replied. We laughed, gently, carefully. At the table, I poured 2 glasses of water, set out plates. The candles flickered in the middle, throwing soft shadows on the walls. "This is beautiful," she said. "It's just dinner." "No," she said, looking around the apartment. "It's more than that." We ate slowly, neither of us in a rush. She complimented the potatoes. I asked her about her favorite books. She told me she used to read by flashlight when I was a baby, just to avoid waking me. And then, halfway through the meal, I asked the question that had lingered in the corners of my heart since our first conversation. Do you forgive him? She took her time answering. She set down her fork, wiped her mouth with her napkin, and looked at me, not with sorrow, but with clarity. No, she said. Not completely. I nodded. Neither do I. Then she added more quietly, but I forgive the part of him that loved you because I saw that too. I looked at my plate, pushed a green bean around with my fork. Sometimes I wonder if he knew how much damage he caused, or if he truly believed he was protecting me. Maybe both, she said. People don't always know when they're harming others, especially when they're convinced they're right. I exhaled slowly. Do you ever wish you could go back? She smiled gently. No, not anymore. The past isn't where we belong, Daniel. And then she reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her fingers were warm, familiar, no longer the hands of a stranger. We belong here, she said, in whatever this is. I didn't pull away. For dessert, we shared the pie. It was too sweet, the crust too thick. But it didn't matter, because for the first time in over 30 years, my mother sat across from me at a table I had set. And I didn't feel like a son abandoned. I felt like a son returned. A week after our dinner, I received a call from the real estate agent managing the Ravenswood house. She told me they'd finished clearing out the furniture and found something I might want to see. When I arrived, the house was quiet again, emptier than ever. No furniture, no echo of footsteps, just walls and silence. She handed me a small, weathered envelope. It was wedged behind a drawer in the bedroom dresser, she said. Looked like it had been there for a long time. I opened it slowly. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was my father's. Inside was a single-page letter. No greeting, no date, just a confession. Daniel, if you're reading this, then I've gone. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve to be remembered. But there are things you need to know. I took you from her, not because she was unfit, but because I was afraid. Afraid of losing control, afraid of being forgotten. I saw how you looked at her, how you lit up when she entered the room. And something in me, something broken, decided that if I couldn't have all of you, she couldn't have any of you. I thought I was protecting you from instability. But I realize now I created a deeper kind of damage, one that silence can't heal. You will carry this for the rest of your life, and I'm sorry for that. I don't expect you to understand me, but I hope in time you understand yourself and her. She loved you, more than I ever allowed you to see. Dad, I stood in the empty bedroom for a long time, the letter in one hand, my other pressed against the wall. The same wall I'd once leaned against as a boy, listening for the creak of a door that never opened again. That night I went to her apartment, a modest place, clean and lived in. She opened the door wearing soft slippers and a sweater with loose threads. I handed her the letter. She read it in silence. When she was done, she sat down and stared at the paper. He wrote this? She asked. I nodded. Do you want to keep it? She folded it carefully and tucked it into a small wooden box on her bookshelf, a box labeled Daniel. Then she turned to me, eyes full of something I didn't recognize at first. Not sadness, not anger, peace. That's the last piece, she said. I think we needed it. I sat beside her on the couch. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Eventually she reached into the box again and pulled out something I hadn't seen in decades. The bracelet. The original one. Frayed, faded, but whole. I found it at a thrift store 3 years ago, she said. By chance. I wasn't even looking. But when I saw it, I knew it was yours. She placed it in my palm, closing my fingers around it. Some things find their way back, she said. I nodded, tears rising. Because some things do. Even people. Even mothers and sons. Even broken truths. It's been 6 months since the day she walked into that boardroom. 6 months since everything I thought I knew about my childhood my parents, and myself, unraveled. I didn't sell the company, but I didn't hold on to it the way my father did either. We restructured, renamed it, stripped away the legacy that had cost too much, and rebuilt something smaller, more honest. I named the new foundation after her, the Evelyn Project, a mentorship program for single mothers returning to the workforce. She cried when I told her. I think it was the first time in her life that someone had honored her story instead of hiding it. We still meet once a week, sometimes at the lake, sometimes over dinner, sometimes just walking quietly through the city, like two people learning each other's pace. She's still my mother, but she's also Evelyn, a woman I'm finally getting to know on her own terms. One evening, she brought over an old photo album, one she'd started building again, page by page. Picture by picture, she handed me a new photo to add to it. It was a picture of us sitting on the park bench. I had my arm around her. She was laughing at something I'd said. Behind us, blurred in the background, was a child on a swing. "That's Noah," she said. "He's my neighbor's son. He reminds me of you at that age." I smiled. "He's lucky." She looked at me, eyes shining. "So are you." There's still pain. Some days it flares up out of nowhere. An old birthday memory, an empty chair at a wedding, a missing page in a childhood book. But the difference now is this. I don't sit with that pain alone. I sit with her. We don't talk about everything. Some things stay folded, tucked between us like a fragile letter never mailed. But what matters most has been said. I forgave her. She forgave herself. And even my father, in some way, found a place inside that forgiveness. Not absolved, but acknowledged. Forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't always come with a declaration. Sometimes it's in a bracelet placed gently into your hand. Sometimes it's in the sound of footsteps in a hallway that once held silence. And sometimes it's just in showing up, week after week, word by word, memory by memory, together.